Damian Voss grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him against the marble wall so hard a painting crashed to the floor. The room went dead silent. 20 people stood frozen, some of them armed, and not one of them moved. "You touched something that belongs to me," Damian said quietly. That was the worst part. Not yelling, just quiet. The man's legs stopped working. He slid down the wall when Damian released him. And Elena Marlowe, standing 10 feet away, heart slamming against her ribs, finally understood what everyone had been trying to warn her about. She had kissed this man 3 weeks ago, by accident, in front of his entire family, and now he was calling her his. Well, if you've never seen a woman accidentally destroy her entire life in under 4 seconds, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. Elena Marlowe had a system. She'd built it over 3 years, piece by careful piece, the way you'd build a wall. 1 brick at a time, no shortcuts, no weak spots. Wake up at 5:30, coffee before the phone. Read every brief before Adrian did. Know every name in every room before he walked into it. Never be surprised. Never be caught off guard. The system had kept her employed, respected, and invisible in exactly the right ways inside one of the most dangerous families in the city. She was good at her job, better than good. Adrian Voss paid her more than most lawyers in the city made, and he paid her that because she was the only person on his staff who could look him in the eye and say, "You're wrong," without flinching. That was rare in his world. People who worked for Adrian Voss had one of 2 problems. They were afraid of him, or they wanted something from him. Elena had managed somehow to be neither. She thought about that on the drive to the Voss estate. The car was a black town car, hired by Adrian's office, and she sat in the back watching the city lights thin out and the neighborhoods get quieter and greener and gated. She had a folder on her lap, background notes on everyone who would be at dinner tonight, because she was incapable of walking into any room unprepared. Her assistant had flagged it as overkill. "It's a family dinner, Elena." "Every room is a meeting," she'd said. She opened the folder. She'd reviewed most of it already. The Voss family had more branches than a corporate org chart, and half of them didn't speak to each other. Adrian's mother, Sylvia Voss, who ran the legitimate social side of the empire with the iron grip of someone who'd survived 3 generations of violent men. 3 uncles, 2 of whom were semi-retired, cousins, wives of cousins, 1 grandmother who was 91 and apparently terrifying, and then, at the bottom of the page, his brother, Damian Voss, age 38, twin. Controls the operational division of Voss Holdings, a title that in this family means something very different than it would anywhere else. There was no photograph. She'd found that strange when she compiled the file. Adrian's name pulled up hundreds of images, charity galas, business announcements, the occasional paparazzi shot. Damian's name pulled up almost nothing. A few grainy images at the edge of crowds, one from a funeral 6 years ago, a man who didn't like being photographed, or a man who was careful not to be. She tucked the folder into her bag as the gates of the estate opened. Boss. Adrian met her at the door, which surprised her. He didn't usually do that. He was in a charcoal suit, no tie, which was as casual as Adrian Voss got. He looked at her the way he sometimes did when he was about to say something he'd been rehearsing. "You look nervous," she said before he could speak. "I'm not nervous." "Your jaw is tight." He exhaled through his nose. "Come inside. I need to speak with you before we go in." They stood in the entryway of the estate, which was the size of most people's living rooms and probably cost more than Elena's entire apartment building. He turned to face her and lowered his voice, even though there was no one nearby. "My brother is coming tonight." Elena kept her expression neutral. "Okay. I don't think I've talked about him much." "You haven't talked about him at all." Adrian's mouth pressed into a line. "There are reasons for that." "I gathered. He's—" Adrian paused, and that pause said more than whatever came next. Adrian Voss did not pause. He was one of the most fluent, controlled speakers she'd ever worked with. A pause from him was like a shout from anyone else. "He's my twin, identical. This can be disorienting for people who haven't met us both before." "I'll manage. I need you to stay close to me tonight. We tend to—" Another pause. Shorter. "We tend to move through rooms differently." I need you to make sure you know which one of us you're approaching at all times." Elena looked at him. "Adrian, I've worked with you for 3 years. I think I can tell you apart." He looked at her for a moment too long. "Elena, just stay close." Something in his voice made her want to ask more. She didn't. She'd learned over 3 years which questions he would answer and which ones would just close him down. She followed him inside. The dinner was in the main hall, a long room with a table that sat 20 people and a fireplace you could park a car in. Sylvia Voss had arranged everything with the kind of precision that reminded Elena of herself, which made her instinctively like and fear the woman in equal measure. She was introduced. Sylvia Voss shook her hand and held it a beat longer than necessary, looking at her with eyes that had filed her away permanently in the first 3 seconds. "So you're the one who keeps Adrian organized," Sylvia said. "I try. He says you're indispensable. He's kind." Sylvia made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "He is many things. Kind is not usually on the list." She released Elena's hand. "It's good to finally meet you." Finally. Elena filed that word away. She moved through the room, shaking hands, attaching faces to names from her folder. Adrian stayed close, as he always did in rooms where he was managing multiple relationships simultaneously. He liked having Elena nearby because she remembered everything, which meant he didn't have to. The evening was going well. She was relaxed. She'd been worried for nothing. And then the room changed. She felt it before she saw it. It was a shift. The way conversations dropped a register, and people's eyes moved to the same point, like a barometric pressure change before a storm. Elena was good at reading rooms, and she felt this one change in her chest before her brain processed it. She turned, following the line of everyone else's attention. A man was standing at the entrance of the hall. He was wearing all black, not a tuxedo, just dark clothes, simple cut, expensive fabric. He was the same height as Adrian, the same build, the same face, and for one disorienting second, Elena's brain did something it almost never did. It glitched, because he was Adrian. He was completely, perfectly, identically Adrian. Same jaw, same cheekbones, same dark hair. And yet every single thing about the way he stood in that doorway was wrong. Adrian moved through rooms like a chess player, controlled, strategic, always 3 steps ahead. This man stood still and let the room come to him. He was scanning the space slowly, taking stock of it. His eyes moved over the guests with the patience of someone who was not looking for a person he wanted to see, but cataloging everyone he needed to be aware of. His eyes landed on Elena. She looked away immediately, looked for Adrian. Adrian was across the room, caught in a conversation with one of his uncles, his back partially turned. Elena moved toward him automatically, the same instinct she'd acted on hundreds of times in 3 years. Adrian's back was turned. She needed to get beside him, get close enough that he could consult her if he needed to. She crossed the room. She was 3 feet away. 2 feet. She registered the suit, charcoal, very like the one he'd been wearing. Same height, same posture from behind. She reached out and touched his arm. He turned. And it was wrong. Not the face. The face was Adrian's face, exactly Adrian's face, down to the faint scar near his left eyebrow. But the eyes were different. Something in the eyes was different in a way she couldn't name. Something that made her whole nervous system say no before her conscious brain had caught up. She'd already moved forward. Later, she would never be completely able to explain why it happened, whether it was the momentum of her own movement or the automatic social script of 3 years closing the distance, or some short circuit between her body and her mind. Her lips touched his cheek. Brief. Barely a second. The way she sometimes greeted Adrian when they'd been in meetings for 12 hours and formality had dissolved. She stepped back, and he was looking at her. Not shocked, not confused, just looking with those eyes that were Adrian's shape and not Adrian's anything else, with the barest curve at one corner of his mouth. "Wrong brother," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. He spoke like a man who never needed to raise it. "Darling." Cholsk. The silence in Elena Marlowe's head was total. She was aware of the room, the conversations that had faltered nearby, The one head that had turned Sylvia Voss at the far end of the table with an expression Elena couldn't read from this distance. She was aware of all of it with the hyper-clarity of someone whose body had flooded itself with adrenaline. She started. You thought I was Adrian, he said, still calm, still unhurried. I understand. We're told it happens. I'm so sorry, Elena said. The words came out even, controlled. She was proud of that. Her voice did not crack. That was completely unprofessional, and I apologize. Don't. She blinked. I beg your pardon? Don't apologize. He tilted his head very slightly, still watching her. It was an accident. Apologies are for things people did on purpose. Elena stared at him for one more second and then did the only thing she could do. She straightened her spine, nodded once, and walked away. She found a point near the window and stood there for 60 seconds, running through everything she knew about controlled breathing, and then she found Adrian. He already knew. She could see it in his face before she reached him, a tightness around his eyes that wasn't anger exactly, but wasn't not anger either. It was an accident, she said quietly, before he could say anything. I know. I walked toward you, or who I thought was you. I know, Elena. His jaw shifted. Did he say anything? He was, she considered the word, fine about it, professional. Adrian's laugh was short and not funny. Damian is never professional. He's just very good at looking like he is. He looked across the room. Come, I'll introduce you properly. Better to get it over with. He walked toward his brother and Elena followed, feeling the strange doubling sensation again as the two men faced each other. Same face, same height, same blood, different gravity. Damian, Adrian said. Adrian. The name came back flat, unreadable. You didn't tell me you were bringing Elena tonight. Adrian's eyes sharpened slightly. You know her name. You talk about her. Damian's gaze moved to Elena briefly. You just never mentioned what she looked like. Elena Marlowe, she said, because standing there being discussed was worse than speaking. Adrian's personal secretary, and I genuinely am sorry about, I told you not to apologize. The words were not unkind. They were not harsh. They were simply final, the way a door closing is final. Not slammed, just shut. She closed her mouth. Damian looked at his brother. Something passed between them, one of those twin wavelength communications that no one else in the room could translate. Then Damian nodded slightly and stepped away, and just like that he was absorbed back into the density of the room, and Elena was standing beside Adrian again. Well, she said. Yes, Adrian agreed. They didn't say anything else about it. But later, after the dinner, after the car ride back, after she was inside her own apartment with her shoes off and a glass of water in her hand, Elena sat on the edge of her bed and replayed it. Not the kiss. The moment after. Wrong brother. Darling. Not embarrassed, not cold, not amused the way cruel people are amused when someone makes a fool of themselves. Something else. Something she didn't have an accurate word for, which bothered her because Elena Marlowe had a word for most things. She thought about the way he'd looked at her, not the way men usually looked at her, which was either as a function, the secretary, the assistant, the woman who managed things, or as a surface, tallish, dark-haired, not unattractive, present in the room. He'd looked at her like she was information he was deciding what to do with. He sees everything as a game, Adrian had said. She told herself to forget it. She had a meeting at 7:30, 3 contracts to review before Wednesday, and a dinner with a client to coordinate. She set her glass down and went to bed. She did not forget it. The next 6 days were normal. She told herself that several times and mostly believed it. The Voss estate was behind her. The dinner was a checked box. She had not permanently embarrassed herself or her employer because Damian Voss had apparently decided to be gracious about it, and Adrian had apparently decided to pretend it hadn't happened, which was his solution to most things that made him feel something he didn't understand. Work was work. The schedule was full. There were 3 ongoing negotiations that required her to sit in rooms full of men in expensive suits who did not want to be negotiating and to keep everything on track without being visible. She was good at that. On day 7, Adrian called her into his office without warning, which was unusual. He was a schedule man. He did not summon. She went in. He was standing at the window, not behind his desk, which was also unusual. Adrian sat behind his desk the way other men sat behind shields. "Damian is going to be at the Meridian meeting on Thursday," he said. Elena went very still inside. Outside, she was the same as always. "Okay. I wanted to tell you, so you're not caught off guard." "I appreciate that." He turned from the window. "He asked about you." "In what context?" "He wanted to know how long you'd worked for me, what your background was." Adrian's eyes were careful, measuring. "Whether you were attached." The word landed wrong. Elena made sure none of that showed. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were my secretary." "That doesn't answer the attached question." "No," Adrian agreed. "It doesn't." She waited. "Elena." He stopped, started again. "You've worked for me for 3 years. In that time, I have trusted you with more than I've trusted most people in my life. You know that." "I do." "My brother is, Damian is." He was struggling in a way that was painful to watch because Adrian Voss did not struggle. He was always precise. He doesn't pursue things casually. When he decides he wants something, he moves toward it, and he rarely loses. "Adrian," she kept her voice even, "I'm a grown adult. I can manage an introduction." "This isn't about managing an introduction." "Then what is it about?" He looked at her for a long time, long enough that the question started to mean more than one thing. "Just be careful," he said finally. She thought about asking what exactly she was supposed to be careful of, the Mafia Boss or her own employer or something he wasn't saying out loud. She thought about it and decided not to. "I'm always careful," she said. "That's why you hired me." Thursday came. The Meridian meeting was a contract review with 3 other families, one of those gatherings that looked like a business meeting and functioned like a treaty negotiation, where every word meant something and the silences meant more. Elena had sat in 40 or 50 of these over 3 years, and she could read them the way other people read facial expressions. She took her seat one back and to the left of Adrian, where she always sat, and she opened her notebook and she waited. Damian came in 12 minutes late. Not apologetically late, just late, the way powerful people are late when they want a room to know that their time works differently than everyone else's. He sat down across the table from Adrian, not beside him across, and he opened nothing because he hadn't brought anything. He glanced at Elena once, briefly, when he sat down. She didn't look away in time, which meant their eyes met for 1 second before she dropped to her notebook. The meeting ran 2.5 hours. She took notes. She flagged 2 points where language was ambiguous enough to cause problems later. She passed one of them to Adrian in writing, which he incorporated into the conversation without acknowledging where it came from, the smooth, practiced transfer they'd developed over years. She felt Damian watching that exchange. When it was over, she was packing her notes when he appeared beside her table. "You caught the liability clause," he said. She looked up. "I'm sorry?" "The clause on third-party liability. You noticed it before Adrian did. You wrote him a note." He was standing close enough that they could speak quietly without anyone else catching it. "I watched you do it. That's my job." "Your job is to take notes and schedule meetings." My job," Elena said, keeping her voice pleasant and her eyes level, "is whatever Adrian needs it to be, which usually includes catching things that would cost him money later." Damian looked at her for a moment. Not the measuring look from the dinner, something different, something that was closer to interest. "Have lunch with me," he said. "No." "Why not?" "Because it would be inappropriate, and you know that." "Lots of professional colleagues have lunch." "Mr. Voss?" She said it firmly, formally. "I work for your brother." "I know who you work for." He picked up his jacket from the chair beside her without hurrying. "I'm asking where you want to have lunch, not asking you to quit." The answer is still no. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He just nodded once, the same way he'd nodded at the dinner before walking away, and he left. Elena stood very still for a moment, and then she started gathering her things again. Her hands were perfectly steady. She was very proud of that. She told Adrian. She told him that evening because she told him everything relevant, and Damian asking his employee to lunch was relevant. She'd built her career on not withholding information from the people who needed it. Adrian's reaction was quiet and controlled and deeply uncomfortable to watch. What exactly did he say? She repeated it exactly. She had a good memory. And you said no. Of course I said no. Adrian nodded. He was doing the thing with his jaw again. Good. Adrian, she waited until he looked at her. I'm not someone who needs protecting from a conversation. I know that. Do you? Because you've said my name that way twice in the last week, and both times it sounded like you were about to warn me about traffic. Something shifted in his expression, something she didn't often see, something that wasn't quite controlled. I'm not warning you about traffic. Then what are you warning me about? He stood up, moved to the window again. She was beginning to understand that the window was where Adrian went when he was thinking something he didn't want her to read on his face. When we were young, he said, Damian and I used to... He stopped. There's a pattern between us. There's been a pattern for a long time. I take something and build it carefully and make it mine. And Damian, another stop, takes it, she said. He turned. That's not what I was going to say. Okay. It's more complicated than that. I imagine it is. Elena. He said her name again, and this time it landed differently. He looked at her with the kind of directness he usually reserved for negotiations where everything was at stake. You are not a thing. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that my brother, for reasons I can't fully explain, has decided to pay attention to you. And when Damian pays attention to someone, it doesn't just go away. She held his gaze. I can take care of myself. I know, Adrian said. That's not what worries me. She waited for him to explain that. He didn't. She went home and she lay in the dark, and she thought about what the difference was between being warned about a man and being told something else entirely. She didn't figure it out that night, but she filed it. 3 weeks later, Damian walked into Adrian's office building at 10 in the morning unannounced and told the front desk he was there for a meeting that did not exist. Elena knew because the front desk called her, because everyone called her, because she was the person in the building who sorted things that didn't fit anywhere else. He says he has an appointment with you directly, the receptionist said, clearly uncertain and slightly alarmed. He doesn't, Elena said. Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes. She went down. Damian was standing in the lobby with his hands in his pockets, looking like he'd been there for an hour and was unbothered by all of it. He looked up when she came off the elevator. You don't have an appointment, she said. I know. Then why? I wanted to see how you handled it. He looked at her steadily. Whether you'd send someone else down or come yourself. Elena stared at him. You came to the building to test how I handle interruptions. I came because I wanted to talk to you, and I knew you'd find reasons not to if I went through the normal channels. He said it without particular apology, just fact. So I removed the normal channels. That is... She stopped, started again. That is an extraordinary level of inconvenience to impose on someone who has said no to you. Yes. He tilted his head slightly. Are you going to have me removed? She thought about it. She genuinely thought about it for about 2 seconds. You have 20 minutes, she said. There's a coffee place half a block up. If you say anything inappropriate, I will walk out. Understood. They walked half a block up. He didn't say anything inappropriate. What he said was, how did you end up with Adrian? She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Is this an interrogation? It's a conversation. Those are the same thing in your family. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Fair. How did you end up in this industry at all? You don't come from it. She looked at him. How do you know that? Because people who come from it have a tell. A way of reading a room that they learned as children before they had a choice about learning it. You read rooms, but you learned it. It was a skill, not a survival mechanism. He said it simply, like he was describing something obvious. So you chose this. Why? Elena was quiet for a moment. She'd been asked that before, by journalists, by family members, by well-meaning people who thought working for a man like Adrian Voss was a cautionary tale. She had standard answers, polished ones. She didn't give him one of those. Because I was good at it, she said. Because the work was hard and real and it required everything I had. And because in most other jobs, I spent a lot of time pretending to need less than I did. To take up less space, want less, expect less. She looked at her coffee. In Adrian's world, competence is the only currency. I'm competent. It turned out to be enough. Damian said nothing for a moment. He doesn't give you credit, he said. She looked up. What? Adrian. He depends on you completely and he doesn't say it. I've watched him in meetings. The way he defers to your note, absorbs your instincts, and then presents the conclusion like it came from him. His voice was not unkind, just accurate. You've been invisible for 3 years. The words hit somewhere they weren't supposed to. I don't need credit, she said. I'm not doing it for credit. I know that. I'm saying you deserve it. Those are different things. She put her coffee down. Why are you doing this? Doing what? This. She gestured between them, showing up, watching me, saying... She stopped. Saying true things? Saying things that are designed to... She stopped again. To what? He was watching her, not crowding, not pushing, just watching, patient and unhurried, like he had nowhere else he needed to be. She picked up her coffee. I have to get back. Elena. It was the first time he'd used her name, not Ms. Marlowe, just Elena, flat and direct. She looked at him. I'm not playing a game, he said. I know that's what Adrian told you. I know what he says about me. I'm not asking you to disbelieve it. He held her gaze. I'm just asking you to form your own opinion. She stood up. Thank you for the coffee. She walked back to the building. She did not look back. But for the rest of the day, underneath every meeting and every contract and every scheduled obligation, there was one line sitting quietly in the back of her mind. You've been invisible for 3 years. She hated that it landed. She hated how accurately it landed. And she hated, most of all, that she couldn't figure out whether Damian Voss had said it because it was true or because he knew exactly what would stay with her after she walked away. She told herself it was nothing. She was good at that, taking something that had lodged itself in an inconvenient place and reclassifying it until it fit somewhere manageable. Damian Voss had said true things in a coffee shop and then she'd walked away, and that was the end of it. People said true things all the time. It didn't mean anything. She believed that for about 4 days. On the 5th day, she caught herself replaying the coffee shop conversation while she was supposed to be reviewing a contract, and she put her pen down and looked at the ceiling for 10 seconds and then picked the pen back up and made herself stop. On the 6th day, Adrian asked her to compile a briefing on the Meridian Project's next phase, and she realized she was including detail on Damian's division that he hadn't asked for, and she deleted it and then sat there for a moment wondering why she'd written it in the first place. On the 7th day, she stopped counting days. Work was the same. Adrian's schedule was the same. She moved through the week with the same precision she'd built her career on, and she did not think about Damian Voss, and she did not wonder whether he would show up somewhere again without warning, and she did not notice, consciously anyway, that she was slightly more aware of the door every time it opened. Then he sent her a document. Not a message, not a call. A document. A contract review for a subsidiary she'd flagged a concern about 3 months ago in a meeting, back when she'd thought no one outside Adrian's immediate circle was paying attention. It arrived through the family's internal courier system with a note that said only, "You were right about the liability structure. I thought you should know. No signature." But she knew who it was from. She read the contract. He'd restructured it exactly the way she would have. She put it in a drawer and didn't think about it. She was very disciplined about not thinking about it. She took it home that night and read it again. Adrian found out about the document 2 days later because Adrian found out about most things that moved through his family's systems eventually. He came to her office, which he rarely did. She usually went to him, and he set a copy of it on her desk without speaking. She looked at it, looked at him. He sent it to me too, Adrian said, with a different note. What did his note say? Adrian's jaw was doing the thing. It said, "She caught this first. You should pay her more." Elena did not say anything. She was not sure what she could say that wouldn't make this worse. "Is there something I should know?" Adrian asked. "No." "Elena, we had coffee," she said, "once. He showed up at the building unannounced, and I gave him 20 minutes because it was easier than having security remove the co-owner of the Voss family from the lobby." She kept her voice even. "That's the whole story." Adrian looked at her for a long time. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before, something that wasn't anger and wasn't professional concern and wasn't quite either of the things she would have expected. It was closer to fear, which made no sense because Adrian Voss was not afraid of things. "Okay," he said. "Okay? I heard you." He picked up the document. "Thank you for telling me." He left. She sat at her desk for a minute after he was gone, turning over that look on his face, the fear she'd seen and immediately second-guessed, and she thought about what he'd said that night in his office. "That's not what worries me." She'd waited for him to explain it, and he hadn't. She was starting to think she understood it now, and she liked that less than not knowing. The next week was quiet. She told herself that was good. It didn't feel good. It felt like the specific quiet that happens right before something loud. She was right. The Voss family had a quarterly gathering, not a dinner, something more formal, a room full of business and family politics tangled together the way they always were in families like this one. Elena had attended 2 of them before as Adrian's secretary, taking notes and keeping her face carefully blank through conversations about money and territory and allegiances that were dressed up in language that would have sounded normal in any boardroom. This was the 3rd. She arrived with Adrian, took her position, and the meeting proceeded the way these things always did, in layers, the visible conversation on top and the real one underneath. She was good at tracking both. She had notes within the first 15 minutes that covered most of what mattered. Damian was across the room when she arrived. She clocked his position the way she clocked everyone's, filed it, and looked elsewhere. She managed 40 minutes before she felt him beside her. She didn't startle. She was proud of that. "You've been avoiding me," he said. Not an accusation, just observation. "I've been working," she said. "Those can be the same thing." "For you, maybe." He was quiet for a moment, and she didn't look at him, keeping her eyes on the room, on Adrian across the space in conversation with 2 of his uncles. "The document upset him," Damian said. "You knew it would." "Yes." She turned her head then, because that was honest in a way she hadn't expected. "Then why send it?" "Because it was accurate." He said it simply. "You caught something important and no one acknowledged it. That bothered me more than upsetting Adrian." "You don't strike me as someone who bothers easily." "I don't." Something shifted in his expression, very slightly, not enough that most people would notice. There are exceptions. She looked back at the room. "Mr. Voss?" "Damian." "I'm not going to call you that." "You call Adrian by his first name." "That's different." "How?" "Because I know him," she said. "You knew his name before you knew him." She stopped. She turned her head again. He was watching her with that expression she'd been trying to classify for weeks. The one that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite intensity and was something in between that she didn't have a word for. "That's not what I meant," she said. "I know what you meant." He looked at the room. "I'm asking you to learn the difference." She didn't answer that. He didn't push it. He stayed where he was for another minute, not touching her, not leaning in, just present in the way he was always present, which was somehow more unsettling than if he'd done either of those things. And then he moved away into the room. She watched him go. She turned back to her notebook and wrote something completely unrelated to the conversation she'd just had, and then she looked at what she'd written and crossed it out and wrote the actual note she needed. Her handwriting was only slightly less neat than usual. She considered that a personal victory. Afterward, in the car back, Adrian was quiet for most of the ride. She'd learned his silences over 3 years. The working silence, where he was running through scenarios in his head, and the processing silence, where something had happened that he was deciding how to feel about, and the closed silence, where he'd already decided and wasn't sharing. This was the 3rd kind. She let it run its course. She looked out the window and watched the city move past. "He talked to you tonight," Adrian said, briefly. "What did he say?" She considered. He said I'd been avoiding him. Had you? I've been working. Elena. His voice was careful, the way voices get when they're carrying more weight than the words suggest. You can tell me. I just did. I mean, if there's something more that you feel the need to manage around me. She looked at him. In the low light of the car, he looked tired in a way he usually hid better than this. Tired, and underneath the tiredness, something older. There's nothing to manage, she said. We had a brief conversation at a family event, that's all. He nodded, looked out his window. He's not what he performs, Adrian said. The words came out quieter than his usual register. He's smarter than he looks, and he looks very smart. And he... A long pause. He pays attention to things for a reason. He doesn't do anything without a reason. I'm aware. Are you? He turned, not unkindly, just with a weight behind it. Because you're one of the most capable people I've ever worked with, Elena, and I want you to understand that even capable people, even people who are very, very good at reading situations, can miss things when they're too close to them. She held his gaze. Is that what you think is happening? He looked at her for a moment, and for the second time she saw that thing in his face that wasn't quite right for the conversation, that older, deeper thing. I don't know, he said, which was the most honest answer she could remember him giving about something that wasn't a contract. The car stopped at her building. She gathered her things. Adrian, she said at the door. He waited. Whatever is happening between you and your brother, she stopped, chose the words carefully. I'm not part of it. I'm your secretary. I'm not a variable. He nodded. I know. But the way he said it suggested he wasn't entirely sure that was still true. She got the call on a Tuesday morning, early, before she'd made it to the office. Unknown number. She almost didn't pick up. I want to show you something, Damian said. She stood in her kitchen in her work clothes, coffee in hand, and stared at the wall for 2 full seconds. How did you get this number? You called the Meridian conference line 3 months ago to reschedule. It logs. That's... She stopped. That's actually unsettling. I thought you'd appreciate that I didn't pretend it was a coincidence. No apology, just the clean honesty that kept catching her off guard. Come see something. It will take 2 hours. I'll have you back at the office by 10. I have a 9 o'clock. Adrian's 9 o'clock got moved. He rescheduled last night. You haven't checked your calendar yet. She looked at her phone. She had not checked her calendar yet. The 9 o'clock had been moved. Last night, at 11:43 p.m., she sat down on a kitchen chair. Damian Voss, are you rearranging my schedule to engineer a gap in my morning? A pause. Adrian rescheduled his own meeting. I just knew about it before you did. That is an extremely fine distinction. Yes. Are you coming? She should have said no. She had material reasons to say no, professional reasons, reasonable reasons that any sensible person would have agreed with. 2 hours, she said, and I'm going directly to the office after. I'll send a car. I'll take my own. Another pause. Of course. He took her to a building on the east side of the city, not an address she knew, a 6-story structure that looked unremarkable from the outside, the kind of building you walk past without registering. He was waiting outside when she arrived. No staff, no security visible, just him in a dark coat, hands in his pockets. What is this? She asked. Come in and I'll tell you. She followed him inside. The lobby was plain. He took her to the 4th floor. When the elevator opened, the plainness stopped. It was a community center. That was the only way to describe it. A large, genuinely functioning community center with classrooms visible through glass walls, a legal aid office, a medical consultation room, a job training area with computers and instructors. It was a Tuesday morning at 8:15, and there were already 40 or 50 people there. Not staff. People who'd come because they needed what was here. She stood in the middle of it and turned slowly. This is yours, she said. It's nobody's. That's the point. He was standing a few feet away, watching her. The building's held through 3 different shells, none of them traceable to me. The funding runs through a foundation with a board of civilians who have no idea where the money starts. Why? Because if it were mine, people who don't like me would burn it down to make a point. She looked at him. That's not what I meant. He was quiet for a moment. I know. She watched a woman at one of the legal aid desks lean across to show an older man something on a document. The man nodded slowly, with the particular relief of someone who has been afraid for a long time and just received a piece of good news. How long has this been here? She asked. 7 years. She did the math. You were 31. My father died when I was 30. The year after He stopped. The stopping was unusual. Adrian Voss, in her experience, did not stop mid-sentence. He revised his route sometimes, but he didn't stop. I needed to do something that had nothing to do with what I'd inherited. She kept her eyes on the room. Does Adrian know about this? No. She turned. Why are you showing me? He was looking at the room too now, not at her. Because you told me you chose this work because competence was the only currency, and I wanted you to see. He paused, and the pause was different than his usual ones. It had something unguarded in it. I wanted you to see that I understand that. The need to build something real, something that earns what it claims to be. She looked at the side of his face. The same jawline as Adrian's, the same profile, technically, wrong. You brought me here, she said slowly, to show me that you're not who your reputation says you are. He turned. No. His eyes were steady. I brought you here so you'd have accurate information. What you decide to do with it is yours. She stood in the middle of the room that didn't officially exist, built by a man who wasn't supposed to be capable of it, and felt something rearrange itself inside her chest. Not dramatically, not with any of the noise that things like this were supposed to make in stories, just quietly, like a chair moved 2 inches to the left. It was enough to be wrong about where it was. I have to get to the office, she said. I know. Thank you for... She stopped. For showing me. He nodded. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She stood there waiting for it, and she did not look back at him, but she was aware, with the full, helpless, infuriating precision of someone who notices everything, that he didn't move away either. The elevator came. She got in. The doors closed. She stood in it alone and took one long breath. That was the moment she understood she was in trouble. Not because Damian Voss had done anything wrong, not because he'd manipulated her or deceived her or played the game Adrian had warned her he always played, but because he'd shown her something true, something careful and real and hidden, the way the most important things about people usually are. And she had recognized it, the same way she recognized her own reflection or her own handwriting, or the specific quality of silence that meant someone was about to say something they'd been holding back too long. She had recognized it because it was the same thing she did. She built the wall. She kept the system. She made herself indispensable and invisible in equal measure. And she told herself that was enough, and she never let herself want more than she could control. And here was Damian Voss, the most feared name in the city's criminal hierarchy, standing in the middle of a community center he'd built and hidden because he needed to create something that earned what it claimed to be. She straightened her coat. She looked at her reflection in the elevator's metal panel, her own face, composed, professional, unreadable. She had 4 hours of work before lunch, a contract to review, 2 calls to schedule. She was not going to think about this. She thought about it the entire way to the office, and all the way through the morning, and once, briefly, precisely once, while she was on the phone with a lawyer who was asking her a question, she answered correctly on pure autopilot. And that evening, when she was home and the day had folded itself back into quiet, she sat at her kitchen table and wrote one line in the notebook she kept for herself. Not the work notebooks, the other one. He builds real things and hides them. She looked at it for a long time. She did not write anything else. She lasted 3 more days before she went back. Not to see him. She told herself that clearly, in the no-nonsense internal voice she used for things she needed to believe. She went back to the East Side building because she'd left a question unanswered, something that had been sitting in the back of her mind since Tuesday morning. The legal aid desk, the woman showing the older man the document, the specific quality of relief on his face. She wanted to know if the legal aid was licensed, whether the attorneys were supervised, whether the operation was clean enough to survive scrutiny if anyone ever looked. Professional concern. That was all. She told herself that in the elevator. She almost believed it by the time the doors opened. Damian was not there. That was fine. She hadn't expected him. She spoke to a woman named Ruth who managed the facility operations, mid-50s, direct, with the manner of someone who had been doing important work quietly for long enough that she no longer needed anyone's approval for it. Ruth walked her through the programs with the kind of pride that doesn't perform itself. She showed her the intake logs, the case outcomes, the one classroom where they ran GED prep on Thursday evenings with 14 regular students, none of whom knew the money behind the lights, and the desks came from a man most of the city was afraid of. Elena listened to all of it and took no notes, because this was not a meeting she was supposed to be in. When she left, Damian was standing outside. She stopped on the front step. He was on the sidewalk, hands in his coat pockets, and she had the brief and irritating thought that he looked like he'd been there a while. "You came back," he said. "I had questions about the legal program." "You could have called." "I don't have your number." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "You have the number I called you from." She had deleted it, which she was not going to tell him. "I wanted to see it in person." He nodded slowly. "And? The licensing is solid. The case supervision is better than most nonprofits I've reviewed for Adrian. Ruth runs a tight operation." She came down one step. "You should be careful about the intake documentation on the medical side. It's a liability gap if anyone ever investigates the funding source." He looked at her. "You reviewed it for liability. Habit. In your free time." "I said it was habit." He was quiet for a moment. Not the weighted silence he used in meetings, the one that made other people fill the space. A different silence, softer around the edges, which was not a word she'd have associated with him a month ago. "Have dinner with me," he said. "Damian. Not a negotiation, not an ambush, just dinner." He held her gaze. "You came back here on your own time to check the legal licensing on a community program you have no professional connection to. I think you can have dinner with me without it meaning something you're not ready for it to mean." She stood on the step and looked at him. Same face as the man she'd worked for 3 years, completely different person. And she thought about Adrian's voice in the car. Even capable people can miss things when they're too close. She thought about her own notebook. He builds real things and hides them. "One dinner," she said. "Public place. I choose it." "Of course." Detab. She chose a restaurant she'd been to twice before with clients. Good food, well lit, busy enough that no conversation was truly private, which meant no conversation could become something it wasn't supposed to be. She arrived first and picked a table in the middle of the room, not the back, not a corner. She was not hiding. He arrived on time, which surprised her. She'd half expected him to be late again, the controlled lateness that announced a certain kind of man. He was not late. He sat down across from her and looked at the menu for 30 seconds and set it down. "You picked the most visible table in the room," he said. "I like good light." "You picked it so that if anyone who knows either of us walks in, they'll see exactly what this is." She looked at him over her menu. "And what is this? 2 people having dinner?" He didn't smile. "Nothing to hide." She ordered the salmon. He ordered whatever the kitchen recommended, which she noted was either a sign of genuine ease or a performance of it, and she couldn't tell which bothered her more than she'd like. They talked. That was what surprised her most later, not what was said, but how easy it was. She'd expected to manage the conversation, to maintain the careful navigation she used in every professional interaction, to keep one part of her attention on the architecture of what was being communicated rather than just the words. She forgot to do that. He asked about her family. Not in the probing way, just in the way people do when they're actually curious and not performing curiosity. She told him about her mother, who had worked 2 jobs for 16 years without complaining about either of them, which was where Elena had learned that consistency was a form of love. She told him about the apartment she'd grown up in, small and never quite warm enough in winter, and how she'd sat at the kitchen table doing homework while her mother stood at the counter doing invoices for the cleaning business she'd built from nothing. She had not told Adrian any of that. She'd worked for him for 3 years, and he knew her professionally down to the marrow, and he had never once asked about her mother. Damian listened the way people listen when they're not waiting for their turn to speak. "Your mother built something real," he said. "She did. And you learned from it." "I suppose I did." "Then we're not so different." He said it without weight, just observation, the way he said most things. "I learned from my father that power without structure is just violence. So I built structure. You learned from your mother that work without acknowledgement is still worth doing, so you worked." He looked at her. "We're both just trying to honor something we were taught before we had enough experience to question it." She sat with that for a moment. "That's either very insightful or very practiced. Can it be both?" "Not usually." He looked at her for a long beat. "Elena, I'm not running a play on you." "How would I know the difference?" "You wouldn't," he said. "Not yet. That's the problem with trust. It doesn't come with proof." He picked up his glass. "You just have to decide whether the risk is worth taking." She looked at him across the table and felt something in her chest do the thing it had been doing since the community center, that quiet rearrangement, like furniture moved in the dark. She was in serious trouble. She told no one about the dinner. Not because she was hiding it. She told herself it wasn't serious enough to report, which was its own kind of lie, because Elena Marlowe categorized and reported everything. The following week, she ran into Mafia Boss at a charity event she'd attended with Adrian. Sylvia found her near the drinks table with the particular precision of a woman who doesn't do anything by accident. "You look well," Sylvia said. "Thank you, Mrs. Voss." "Sylvia." The correction was gentle but firm. "We've had dinner together. You can call me Sylvia." She looked at Elena with those eyes that filed everything. "I hear you've been spending some time on the east side." Elena kept her face perfectly still. "I'm sorry?" "The building on Carver Street." Sylvia took a sip of her water, unhurried. "I've known about it for 4 years. Damian thinks he's hidden it from the family." A slight pause. "He's only hidden it from Adrian." Elena processed that. "You've never told Adrian?" "No." "Why not?" Sylvia looked at her steadily. "Because it would have changed how he sees his brother, and not in the direction it should." She tilted her head slightly. "My sons have been carrying a wound between them for 30 years, Miss Marlowe. They are both, in their own ways, waiting for the other one to confirm their worst fear. Adrian fears Damian will always take what matters to him. Damian fears Adrian will always be chosen over him." Elena said nothing. She was listening with everything she had. "What they've never managed," Sylvia continued, "is to simply see each other clearly, without the history in the way." She looked at Elena. "You're unusual. You see people as they are, not as the story you've already written about them. I noticed that the first night you came to the house." A pause. "So has Damian." "Mrs. Voss, Sylvia, I want to be clear that I'm not warning you," Sylvia said. "I'm not giving you my blessing either, because that's not mine to give. I'm just telling you what I see." She set her glass down. "My son has built something good and hidden it because he learned very early that anything he loved would be used against him. That's not a small thing to overcome." She excused herself with the grace of a woman who'd said exactly what she meant to say and didn't need a response. Elena stood at the drinks table and felt the shape of the conversation settling into her, the weight of it. Anything he loved would be used against him. She thought about the way he'd shown her the building. No performance, no dramatic reveal, just, "Come see. Draw your own conclusions. The door open. Take it or leave it." That was not how a man with nothing to lose operated. That was how a man operated who had spent his entire life calculating the risk of being honest and had decided once, with her, to try it anyway. She put her glass down carefully and went to find Adrian. He knew something was wrong before she spoke. That was the thing about 3 years. You learned someone's frequency whether you intended to or not, and she had apparently learned his because she could see the exact moment he registered her face. "What happened?" he asked, low, pulling her away from the nearest conversation. "Nothing happened," she said. "I need to tell you something. I should have told you before, and I didn't, and that was wrong." His jaw tightened. "Tell me." I had dinner with Damian. The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted. When? He said. Not a question. The word was flat, a surface with no give in it. Last week. Last week. He repeated it the way people repeat things when they need a moment before they say something they can't take back. You had dinner with my brother last week and you're telling me at a charity event. I know how that sounds. Do you? Adrian, how long? He stopped. His voice was doing something complicated, trying to stay controlled and not entirely succeeding, which was rare enough that it frightened her a little. How long has this been? What is this, Elena? I don't know yet, she said, because she was not going to lie to him. Not about this. He deserved better than that. The look on his face was not what she expected. She had braced for anger, cold, sharp, professional. What she saw was something raw, something that looked like a man watching something he hadn't admitted he wanted disappear before he'd had the chance to say so. And that was when it hit her. Not like a gradual understanding, like a door opened suddenly in a dark hallway. She looked at Adrian Voss, the man she had worked beside for 3 years, who had never once said anything directly, who had paid her more than she needed and trusted her more than anyone and warned her away from his brother with a fear that she'd classified wrong, and she understood what she'd been missing. Adrian, she said. Her voice came out different, careful. What did you think this was? Us. What did you think? It doesn't matter, he said. It does. Elena. He looked at her once, hard, and then looked away. It doesn't matter what I thought, because I never said it, and that's… He stopped. His throat moved. That is on me. The noise of the event continued around them, oblivious and uncaring, the way the world always is when something private breaks open inside it. She had never felt so sorry for someone and so helpless about it at the same time. I didn't know, she said. I need you to believe that. I did not know. I know you didn't know. His voice was controlled again, but it cost him. She could see exactly what it cost him. You're not the kind of woman who would have… You would never have… He stopped. I know. Adrian, please. Just the one word. Quiet. Not here. She closed her mouth. He straightened his jacket. He was already rebuilding the surface. She could watch it happening, layer by layer, the way a man who has had decades of practice puts himself back together in public. It was one of the most painful things she had ever watched. I need some air, he said. Professional voice, empty of everything. Can you manage the Hendricks introduction at 9 without me? You know what we need from them. Of course. Thank you. He nodded once, formally, and walked toward the terrace. She stood where he'd left her and did not move for a long moment. And then, because the alternative was falling apart in a room full of people who could use it against the Voss family, she went and handled the Hendricks introduction. She was perfect. She said exactly the right things. She secured exactly the commitment Adrian had been seeking. She was very good at functioning while something else entirely was happening inside her. The phone rang at 1 a.m. She was awake. She hadn't tried to sleep because she'd known it wouldn't work. She was sitting at her kitchen table with the notebook open and nothing written in it when the number came up. Not Damian, not Adrian, a number she didn't recognize. She answered. Miss Marlowe? A man's voice, unhurried, deliberate, with the flat affect of someone who has learned to remove warmth from his voice on purpose. My name is Vincent Caro. I think it's time we had a conversation. She knew the name. Her blood went cold. Vincent Caro was not in her files on the Voss family because he wasn't connected to the Voss family, not officially. He was connected to the Harmon Group, the rival network that had been circling the Voss territories for 2 years. The one Adrian monitored the way you monitor a slow leak, always present, never quite an emergency. How did you get this number? She asked. Her voice was even. You'd be surprised what becomes accessible when people are distracted. A pause. The Voss brothers are distracted, Miss Marlowe. They've been distracted for some weeks now, which I understand has something to do with you. She said nothing. I'm not calling to threaten you, Caro continued. I want you to understand that clearly. I'm calling because I believe you are an intelligent woman in a position that is about to become very dangerous, through no fault of your own, and I want to offer you information before it's too late for it to be useful. I don't want your information. You'll want this. Another pause. Longer, calculated. Ask Damian Voss why he first noticed you, not what he told you, what actually made you visible to him. The pause stretched one beat further. Ask him about the Carver Street building and who originally suggested he build it. Ask him when, and then ask yourself why, of all the people in Adrian Voss's organization, it was his personal secretary who was chosen to be the connection point. The word chosen landed wrong. You're trying to make me paranoid, she said. I'm trying to make you accurate, Caro said. There's a difference. You, of all people, should appreciate that. The line went dead. She sat at the table and looked at the blank page of her notebook and felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel, the specific vertigo of a person who has built their entire stability on their ability to read a situation correctly and who is now looking at the possibility that they got something catastrophically wrong. She did not sleep. In the morning, she dressed with the mechanical precision of someone moving through a task they've done 1,000 times. And she drove to the east side, and she walked into the building on Carver Street, and she asked Ruth a single question: how long the building had been operating before the program started. Ruth said, "About 8 months of setup. Mr. V wanted everything structured first." When exactly did the setup begin? Ruth looked at her paperwork. Spring, 3 years back. April or May, I think. We didn't open to the public until January the following year. 3 years back. April or May. Elena had started working for Adrian in March. 2 months after she started. 2 months after she became Adrian Voss's most trusted employee, the one person with access to everything. She stood very still in the middle of the room where she'd felt something rearrange itself inside her chest, and she looked at the desks and the classrooms and the careful, real, hidden good things she'd believed was a window into who Damian Voss actually was. And she thought about Caro's word. Chosen. The community center was real. Ruth was real. The people coming through the door were real. But the timing, the precise, careful timing of when Damian had first built a thing that would eventually be used to show her something true about him, was not a coincidence. Nothing in this family was ever a coincidence. She walked back to her car. She sat in it without starting it. She looked at her hands on the steering wheel. She had spent 3 years being indispensable by never missing anything, by never being the person in the room who didn't see what was happening. And she had missed this. The question she couldn't answer yet, the one that would determine everything, was whether she'd been shown something real that also happened to be strategic, or whether the entire thing had been engineered from the beginning. Whether Damian Voss had built a community center 7 years ago and noticed her 3 years later, or whether he had decided she was useful and built the community center as a place to eventually bring her. The difference mattered more than anything else had ever mattered in her career. She started the car. She drove to the office, and she sat at her desk, and she opened her calendar, and she stared at Adrian's name at the top of the 9 o'clock slot. Then she closed her calendar and picked up her phone and called the one number she'd deleted and then memorized anyway, because she was constitutionally incapable of letting go of information. He answered on the second ring. Elena. Tell me something, she said. Her voice was steady. She had worked very hard on steady. And I need you to tell me the truth because I will know if you don't. That's not a warning. It's just accurate. She paused. Who told you to build the center on Carver Street? The silence on the other end lasted exactly long enough to tell her the answer was complicated. We need to talk in person, he said. Answer the question. Another silence. Then, it was my idea. When did you have it? Elena? When, Damian? The longest pause yet. And in the length of it, and in the particular quality of what he didn't say, Elena Marlowe understood that the ground she'd been standing on was not where she'd thought it was, and that the next thing he said was either going to save something or end it, and that she was no longer in control of which one it would be. The silence on the phone lasted 7 seconds. She counted every one. I need you to come to me, Damian said finally. Not a coffee shop, not a public place. My office. I'll explain everything. You'll explain everything, she repeated. That's not reassuring. Elena, the center opened 3 years ago. I started with Adrian 3 years ago. She kept her voice flat, clinical, the way she talked about contracts when emotions had no business being in the room. That's not a coincidence I can explain away. So before I go anywhere with you, you're going to tell me right now, on this phone, whether I was a target. Another silence. Different from the first one. This one had texture to it, like something being turned over carefully before it was handed out. No, he said. That's not an answer. That's a word. You were not a target. His voice dropped. The unhurried quality was still there, but something underneath it had changed, compressed, like a man holding something very still because if he moves it wrong, it breaks. The center existed before you did, before Adrian hired you. I built it because I needed to build something that had nothing to do with what my father left me. I told you that, and it was true. The timing is what it looks like on the surface, and it is not what Caro told you it is. She pressed her thumb against the edge of the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. Then why did you pause? Because the truth is complicated, and I knew that if I said it wrong, you'd hear it as confirmation of what he wanted you to believe. Say it anyway. Not on the phone. Damian, please. The word came out unpolished, unguarded in a way that didn't fit the version of him she'd been cataloging. Not controlled, not strategic, just a man asking. Come to me. Give me 20 minutes to explain. If you walk out after 20 minutes believing I used you, I won't come after you. I'll let it be what it is. She sat in the parked car on the east side of the city and looked at the building through the windshield. Ruth was inside somewhere doing intake interviews. 14 people on Thursday nights learning things that would change the direction of their lives. Real. She knew it was real. The question was whether real could also be weaponized. Text me the address, she said. His office was not what she expected. She'd built a picture in her mind without meaning to, something like Adrian's space, all dark wood and controlled surfaces and the faint suggestion of a room that had been designed to make visitors feel slightly smaller than they actually were. Damian's office was in a building she'd driven past 100 times without registering. 4th floor. The furniture was expensive but not theatrical. One wall was entirely windows. There were files on the desk that hadn't been staged, and a coffee cup that hadn't been cleared away, and a jacket slung over the back of a chair in a way that meant someone had actually taken it off and put it there, not someone who wanted to project an image of casual ease. He was standing when she walked in. Not behind the desk, just standing. He looked like he'd been up all night, which meant they had that in common. Sit down, he said. I'll stand. He nodded. He wasn't going to fight her on positioning. She gave him that point. The center, he said. I started planning it 14 months before it opened. That puts the planning in the same general window as when Adrian hired you, which is what Caro wants you to fixate on. His voice was even, but there was an edge underneath it she hadn't heard before. Not anger at her, anger at the situation, at being forced into this corner. What he's not telling you is that I had no idea who Adrian's new secretary was until 8 months into your employment. I don't track Adrian's staff. We were barely speaking at that point. Then when did you notice me? The Ridgeline meeting, 14 months ago. He held her gaze. You flagged a clause that would have cost my brother $6 million on a rolling contract. You wrote it on a notepad, folded it, and slid it to him without interrupting the conversation. He incorporated it and closed the deal. Nobody in that room saw you do it except me. He paused. I asked one of Adrian's associates afterward who you were. He said, that's his secretary. And I thought, that's not a secretary. That's the most important person in the room. She looked at him. That's when it started. That's when I paid attention. The distinction was careful and deliberate. Those are different things, Elena. Noticing someone is not the same as deciding to manipulate them. But you didn't approach me. No. Why not? Because you worked for my brother. He said it simply. And because I knew what it would look like, what he'd think, what everyone would think. So I stayed back. A beat. And then you walked across a room and kissed me by mistake. And staying back became harder. She felt something in her chest tighten. She ignored it. Caro said you were the one who suggested the location for the center, that someone brought you to Carver Street specifically. Damian's expression shifted, just slightly. Something came into his eyes that was not quite anger and not quite the thing she'd classify as guilt, but existed in the uncomfortable territory between them. My father suggested it, he said, 4 years before he died. He said it was a neighborhood that needed anchoring. He meant it as a real estate opportunity. His jaw moved. I took it as something else. She stared at him. Your father suggested it. Yes? Caro knew that. Caro knows things about this family that he shouldn't. That's the whole point. His voice hardened, not at her. Caro is not calling you out of concern. He's destabilizing. He's been trying to find a crack in this family for 2 years, and he found one. Not me, not Adrian, not any of the business. He found you. The space between us where neither of us has been honest enough. He took one step toward her, slow, deliberate, readable, not crowding, just closing the distance enough to make this real. He is using the fact that we have feelings that we haven't said out loud to make you doubt the one thing that's actually true. Which is what? She said. Her voice came out quieter than she wanted. That none of this was strategic. He held her gaze and didn't let it go. I didn't notice you because you were useful. I noticed you because you were doing something remarkable in a room full of people who couldn't see it, and then I spent 14 months trying to figure out how to exist near you without wrecking everything, and I did it badly. And I made mistakes, and the timing will always look wrong to someone who wants it to. He stopped. But I did not build something real and use it to trap you. That's not who I am. She stood in the middle of his office and looked at him and felt the weight of every piece of information she'd collected in the last 3 weeks pressing against the inside of her skull simultaneously. She was good at this. Reading people. Separating performance from truth. It was the skill that had defined her entire professional life. She read him now as carefully as she'd ever read anything. And what she saw was a man who was telling the truth about the things that mattered and knew she might not believe him, and was standing still and letting her decide anyway. That was when her phone rang. Adrian. She looked at the screen, looked at Damian. Answer it, he said. She answered. Where are you? Adrian's voice was wrong immediately. Not the controlled version, not even the raw version from the charity event. Something she'd never heard. Stripped clean of everything except urgency. She caught herself. I had a meeting. Elena, listen to me carefully. A sound in the background she couldn't identify. Caro's people have been in my building. They were in the filing system. I don't know how deep. I need to know where the Harmon contracts are, and I need to know right now. She was already moving. To the desk, to Damian, who had heard his brother's name and was already alert. East Wing server, partition 3, folder labeled Meridian Contingency, she said. Adrian, what? Are you safe? The question hit her sideways. Adrian did not ask that. Adrian managed. Adrian strategized. He did not ask that. Yes, she said. I'm fine. What's happening? Caro made a move. He's not waiting anymore. A pause. He called you, didn't he, last night? Yes. What did he say? He tried to make me doubt Damian. She heard her own words and felt Damian go very still beside her. He said the timing of the center was deliberate. He wanted me distracted. He wanted us all distracted. Adrian's voice was controlled again, but barely. The seams were showing. The call was cover. He was using it to buy time while his people got into the system. Another pause. Elena, I need you to come in. I need you in the office. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Be careful. He said it twice in the same tight voice, and the second time she understood it wasn't professional. She hung up. She looked at Damian. His face had done something complicated while she was on the phone. She'd watched it process his brother's voice, the situation, the specific word distracted, and land somewhere that wasn't simple. Caro went for the system while he had you on the phone, Damian said. Yes. How much does he have access to? Potentially a lot. She was already moving toward the door. The Meridian contracts, the contingency files, 3 years of correspondence. Elena. He was beside her before she reached the door. Not blocking, just there, close, with an expression that said he had about 15 things to say and 10 seconds to say them. This isn't over with him. If he's moved on the system, it's the opening, not the endgame. He's going to use what he took as leverage. I know that. When he does, it won't just be Adrian at risk. His voice was low. You're in these files. 3 years of your work. Your name. She held his gaze. I know. I'm going to Adrian's office, she said. Because that's where I'm needed. Because that's where I work. She held his gaze for one more second. We're not done with the other conversation, but right now this is what there is. He looked at her. Something in his face settled. Not acceptance exactly, but recognition. He nodded once. She went. Bumty. The office was controlled chaos, which was the Voss version of panic. 3 people on phones, 2 at computers, Adrian in the center of it, looking like a man who had already identified every variable and was calculating which one to address first. He looked at her when she walked in, and something in him steadied. She saw it happen and tucked that information away for later. Talk me through the partition, he said immediately. She talked him through it. She pulled up the access logs on her own credentials and walked him through exactly which files Caro's people had touched, in what order, for how long. She did it in 10 minutes. Adrian listened without interrupting once, which was how she knew he understood the severity. When she finished, the room was quiet. He has the Harmon agreement, Adrian said. Yes. And the Mercer communication. Yes. He turned away. Just for a moment, 1 second of not being watched while he processed what that meant. She let him have it. Then he turned back. We need to move on Caro before he uses it. Not legally. Legally takes too long. His eyes went to 2 of the men in the room, and some silent communication passed that Elena understood the shape of, without needing the specifics. Adrian. She kept her voice low. Just for him. If you move on Caro directly, he'll use the documents as insurance. He'll have them distributed before you get to him. I know. Then you need leverage first, something he wants more than what he already has. Adrian looked at her. What does he want? He wants the Voss family destabilized. He's been circling the territories for 2 years. He doesn't need money, he needs the split. He needs you and Damian unable to coordinate. She watched him, which is why the call to me was the first move, not the system breach. The call. The room had gone quiet around them, everyone listening. He manufactured a reason for you and Damian to be at each other, she continued. He knew about my... She stopped, chose the word carefully. He knew about the situation between us. If I believe Damian used me, Adrian and Damian lose the ability to coordinate. Caro walks into the gap. Adrian was very still. How does he know about you and Damian? Someone in the family has been talking to him. The silence that followed that sentence was a different kind. Heavy. The kind that happens when a room full of people realizes simultaneously that one of them might not be who they appear to be. Adrian's eyes moved around the room slowly, professionally. She watched him catalog every face with the same precision she used to catalog contract language. Clear the room, he said. People moved. Within 90 seconds, it was just the 2 of them. He sat down, which was unusual because Adrian stood when he was managing a crisis. Stood because sitting meant settling and settling meant slowness. The fact that he sat meant something had shifted in how he was approaching this. Tell me what you need from me, she said. He looked at the desk. I don't know how to ask you this. Then just ask it. Do you trust him? He didn't look up. Damian, after everything, after Caro's call, do you trust what he told you? She thought about it honestly. She owed him that much. I trust that the center is real, she said. I trust that the timing looks wrong and isn't. And I trust... She stopped, finished it anyway. I trust that he is not the version of him that you're afraid of. I think you know that too, and it scares you more than the alternative. Adrian looked up. The rawness from the charity event was back, uncontained by context this time. He's my brother, Adrian said. He's been my brother for 38 years. Do you know what it's like to spend 38 years not being able to tell if someone loves you or just needs you to confirm something about themselves? She sat down across from him, not as his secretary, just as the person in the room who had known him long enough to sit down. Yes, she said quietly. Actually, I do. He looked at her. Understanding moved across his face, the specific understanding of a man who has just realized that the person he's talking to is not just answering his question about someone else. They sat in that for a moment. I need Damian, Adrian said finally. The words cost him. She could see the price of every syllable. If Caro has an inside source and I can't coordinate with the one person I trust to handle the operational side, call him, she said. Elena, Adrian. She held his gaze. Call your brother. He looked at his phone for a long time, long enough that she started to think he wouldn't. Then he picked it up. Damian arrived in 18 minutes. She knew because she was watching the clock without meaning to, standing at the window with coffee she wasn't drinking while Adrian made 2 calls she wasn't part of, and the building ran its controlled chaos in the hallways outside. He walked in and the room recalibrated around him, the way it always did. Not dramatically, just the slight adjustment of a space when something that carries its own gravity enters it. He looked at Elena first, brief, a question in it that she answered with a small nod. Then he looked at his brother. The two of them stood on opposite sides of Adrian's desk, and Elena felt the 38 years in the room with them, the weight of it, the wound of it, the specific and exhausting history of 2 people who shared a face and had spent most of their lives unable to share anything else. Caro breached the system, Adrian said. No greeting, no preamble, just the problem, because that was what they had in common, and common ground was where you started. I know, Damian's voice was even. He got the Mercer file. Adrian's eyes sharpened. How do you know which file? Because I know what he was looking for. He's been trying to invalidate the Mercer agreement for 2 years. It's the one contract that blocks his access to the Northern Distribution Network. If he can prove the agreement was coerced, it falls apart legally. He looked at his brother. He didn't breach the system to destabilize us. He did it to get that specific document. Then he has what he needs. Unless the document he took isn't the real one. Silence. Elena looked at Damian. What do you mean? He looked at her. 3 months ago, I had reason to believe someone was feeding Caro information about our filing systems. So I moved the real Mercer agreement and replaced it with a version that looks authentic but has 2 clauses that would actually strengthen our position if presented in court. His gaze went back to Adrian. Caro just stole a document that will destroy his own case if he uses it. Adrian stared at his brother. For 10 seconds, neither of them spoke. Elena watched something cross Adrian's face, something that went through surprise and disbelief and landed somewhere that looked like the beginning of a reckoning. You knew about the leak, Adrian said. I suspected. For 3 months. Yes. And you didn't tell me. Damian's jaw moved. I didn't know who I could trust inside your circle. I still don't. He held his brother's gaze. I couldn't come to you without knowing the leak wasn't you. The words landed in the room like something physical. Elena felt them hit. She watched Adrian feel them hit. You thought I might be working with Caro, Adrian said, flat, precise. I didn't know. The honesty of it was brutal and clean. I needed to rule it out. By doing this alone for 3 months. Yes. And now, Adrian's voice had gone to a register Elena had never heard from him. Not anger. Something older and more tired and more real. Now you're here. Why now? Damian looked at him. And then something shifted in his face, something Elena had seen once before, in the building on Carver Street when he'd let the guarded thing drop for just a moment and shown her something undefended underneath. Because he went after her, Damian said, and I am not doing this alone anymore. The room was very quiet. Adrian looked at his brother for a long time. Elena looked at neither of them, giving them whatever privacy 2 people could have while she was standing 8 feet away. Then Adrian said, with the voice of a man clearing 38 years of debris off something he'd buried, Who is the leak? Marcus Hale, Damian said. Your contracts manager. Third-generation family staff, which is why no one looked at him. He pulled out his phone and set it on the desk. I have 4 months of communications between him and Caro's people. Location data, financial transfers, the structure of the whole arrangement. Adrian looked at the phone, looked at his brother. Give me an hour, Adrian said. Damian nodded. Elena watched them. The two men with the same face standing on opposite sides of a desk with 38 years of misread signals and missed chances between them. And she thought about what Sylvia Voss had said at the charity event. They are both waiting for the other one to confirm their worst fear. Nobody was confirming it today. She set her coffee down and went to the desk and opened her laptop. I'll pull Hale's access logs for the last 6 months. If he's been feeding information, there'll be a pattern in when he accessed files versus when Caro made moves. She looked up. Give me 20 minutes. Both brothers looked at her. Well, she said, don't just stand there. The next 4 hours were the most pressurized of her professional life, and her professional life had not been short on pressure. She worked with a focus that narrowed everything else down to a pinpoint. The files, the logs, the patterns emerging from data that had been hiding in plain sight for months. Hale's access history was a roadmap once you knew what you were looking for. She built the case piece by piece, cross-referencing timestamps, flagging anomalies, compiling it into something that would hold up under the kind of scrutiny this would face. Damian worked beside her, not in her way, not managing her, just present and useful. He knew the operational side of the files better than anyone, and when she needed context, he gave it cleanly, efficiently, without commentary. Adrian made calls. 3 that she heard parts of, 2 that he took in the hallway. He came back from each one with the expression of a man tightening a perimeter. At one point, she reached across the desk for a file, and her hand touched Damian's, and neither of them said anything, and neither of them moved away immediately. Adrian was across the room. He didn't see it. Or he did and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. By 7 p.m., they had everything. The case against Hale was complete. The trap for Caro, the poisoned document he'd stolen, was ready to spring. 2 calls from Adrian to the right people would begin the process of dismantling everything Caro had spent 2 years building. Elena sat back in her chair and felt the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had run at full capacity for 18 straight hours. It's enough, she said. You have enough. Adrian nodded. He was looking at the compiled file with the expression of a man who has just contained something that could have destroyed him. Yes. Damian was standing at the window, the same position Adrian habitually took, she noticed, and thought that there was probably a whole conversation in that symmetry that neither of them would ever have. He turned. Caro will know by morning that the document is wrong, he said. He'll move. Let him move, Adrian said. Every move he makes from here uses the bad document. He's already lost. He doesn't know that yet. By the time he does, it won't matter. Damian nodded slowly, looked at Elena. Something in his face asked a question that had nothing to do with Caro or files or the last 4 hours. She looked back at him and didn't answer it. Not yet. Not in this room, not with Adrian 12 feet away and everything that had been said and not said still hanging in the air between all 3 of them. But she didn't look away either. Adrian set the file down. He looked at his brother, then at Elena, then at some middle space between them that contained the thing none of them had addressed directly. I need a drink, he said. Adrian, she started. I'm not... He stopped, ran a hand across his face in a gesture she'd never seen from him before, the gesture of someone who is genuinely tired and not performing being genuinely tired. I'm not falling apart, I just need 10 minutes. He looked at his brother once more, and in that look she saw 38 years of something shifting, not resolving, not healing, but moving, the way a joint moves after it's been locked in place too long. You stayed, he said. To Damian. Just that. Damian looked at his brother. Yeah, he said. I stayed. Adrian picked up his jacket and walked out. The room was suddenly just the 2 of them and the residue of a crisis that had been managed and the older, quieter crisis that hadn't. Damian turned from the window. Are you all right? He asked. She laughed, a real one, short, surprised out of her by the question's simplicity after everything. "I don't know," she said. "Ask me tomorrow." He crossed the room and crouched down in front of her chair, which put his face level with hers, which was not what she expected, which was apparently something Damian Voss specialized in. "I need to say something," he said, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond." She looked at him. "Okay." "I have spent the last 14 months being more careful with you than I have ever been with anything. Careful not to push. Careful not to assume. Careful not to make you into something that fit what I wanted instead of what you actually were." His voice was low and even, and she could hear the precision in it, the same precision she used herself when something mattered enough to say right. "And I know the timing looks wrong. I know Caro planted a seed. I know you don't have proof that isn't also potentially strategy." He held her gaze. "But I need you to know that the thing I feel when I'm in a room with you is not strategy. I don't know what to do with it most of the time. It makes me worse at everything else. That is," the corner of his mouth moved, "not how a useful tool operates." She looked at him crouched in front of her in his brother's office after the longest day of her professional life, with the honesty sitting right there on the surface of his face, unguarded, not performing, just there. She thought about her notebook. The single line, "He builds real things and hides them." She thought about Ruth walking her through the programs. The older man's face when the woman at the desk showed him the document. She thought about 14 months, of being noticed before she was approached, of being given space to decide. She opened her mouth to say something, she wasn't sure exactly what, something that was honest and careful and worthy of what he just said, when her phone lit up on the desk. Unknown number, the same unknown number as last night. She picked it up before she thought better of it. "Ms. Marlowe?" Caro said. His voice was different from last night, flatter. The practiced warmth was gone. "I see you've had a productive day." "You should check the document you took," she said, "before you do anything with it." A pause. "Excuse me?" "Check it," she said. "Compare it to the version you've been working from. You'll find some interesting differences." She kept her voice level. "And then I'd suggest you reconsider your next move very carefully, because right now you have nothing and a very clear pattern of criminal behavior that has been documented by 3 parties independently." She looked at Damian, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read. "This is over. Walk away." Silence on the line. "You're more dangerous than I calculated," Caro said. "Yes," she said. "I am." She hung up. Damian was looking at her. "Is it over?" he asked. She set the phone down, looked at the door Adrian had walked out of, looked back at him. "The Caro part," she said carefully, "is over." He held her gaze, understanding what she meant, waiting. "The rest of it," she said, and her voice did something she hadn't quite planned for it to do, something that let too much through, something real and unmanaged and human. "The rest of it, I don't know how to finish yet. Because finishing it means changing everything, and I built my whole life on knowing exactly where everything goes." He didn't move closer, he didn't close the distance. He just looked at her, steady and unhurried, and said, "I know." And then Adrian walked back in. Adrian walked back in and read the room in under 3 seconds, which was one of the things Elena had always respected about him. He didn't say anything immediately. He looked at Damian crouched near her chair, and he looked at Elena, and he looked at the phone on the desk, and he put it together the way he put everything together. Quietly, completely, without needing anyone to explain it to him. He set his glass down on the edge of the desk. "Caro called," he said. Not a question. "I told him to check the document," Elena said. "He'll know by tonight." Adrian nodded slowly. "Good." He pulled a chair out and sat down, which meant this was not a moment he was going to manage from a standing position. That told her more than any words would have. Marcus Hale was escorted from the building 20 minutes ago. Security has his credentials and his access is terminated. A pause. "He didn't deny it." "Did you expect him to?" Damian asked. "No." Adrian looked at his brother. "He said you'd been watching him for months." "I had." "He also said—" Adrian stopped. Something crossed his face. "He said he went to Caro because he believed the family was fracturing, that there was an internal division and he was positioning for the winning side. He looked at Damian. He thought you and I were finished. Damian said nothing. He wasn't entirely wrong, Adrian said. His voice was even, but the effort behind the evenness was visible. We have been fractured. For a long time. Long enough that someone on the inside read it as a permanent condition. He looked at the desk surface. That's on both of us. The room held that. Elena did not move. This was not a moment she was part of. Not yet. And she was experienced enough to know the difference between a silence that needed filling and one that needed space. Damian stood up slowly from where he'd been crouching. He moved to the other chair and sat down across from his brother, and the two of them were face to face across Adrian's desk in a way that felt like it hadn't happened in a very long time, if ever. I should have come to you about Hale, Damian said. Yes. I couldn't trust the channel. I know. Adrian looked at him. I'm not saying you were wrong to be careful. I'm saying, he stopped, pressed his thumb against the side of his glass. I'm saying that somewhere along the way, I became someone my own brother couldn't trust with a problem, and I need to know when that happened. Damian was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality Elena had heard once before, in the building on Carver Street, when he'd said something unguarded about their father. It didn't happen at one moment. It accumulated. Tell me. Adrian, tell me. Not a command. Something rawer than that. A request from a man who had spent 38 years communicating in strategy and was trying, visibly, to do something different. I need to hear it. Not the version I've told myself, yours. Damian looked at his brother for a long time. Then he looked at Elena, and the look was asking something. Whether she should leave, whether this was too private for a witness. She started to stand. Stay, Adrian said. He said it to her without looking away from Damian. You've been in this from the beginning. You should hear it. She sat back down. Damian looked at his hands briefly, then at his brother. When we were 12, he said, Father decided which of us would take which side of the business. You know the story. He said you had the mind for the legitimate side, the relationships, the public face. He said I had a brief pause. The other qualities. The ones needed for the operational work. I remember. What you don't know is that the night before he told us, he came to my room. Damian's voice was flat but careful, like someone carrying something fragile by holding it very still. He told me he'd already decided. He told me you were his pride, his future. He told me I was his... He stopped. The word didn't come. He said I was his instrument. That I would do what needed doing so that you could do what the family needed to be seen doing. He looked at his brother. He said it like it was a compliment. The silence was total. Adrian's face had gone through several things while Damian was speaking and had landed somewhere Elena had never seen on him before. A kind of shattered steadiness, the look of a man standing in rubble that used to be a wall he'd built to explain his life to himself. I didn't know that, Adrian said. I know you didn't. Damian, I never thought of you as... I never saw you that way. I know that too. The words were not forgiving exactly, but they were honest. But I spent 20 years waiting for you to confirm it, watching everything you built and believing that your success was the proof that I was exactly what he said, the part that gets used. His jaw moved. And then you would look at me like I was taking things from you, and it confirmed it all over again. I couldn't win. Any version of me was the wrong version. Adrian set his glass down. He looked at the desk. Elena watched the muscles in his throat work as he processed 26 years of a story he'd been inside without knowing its actual shape. I looked at you like that, Adrian said slowly, because I was afraid. Not of you taking things, of... He stopped, started again. Father told me I was the pride, the future. Do you know what that felt like? Like everything I did would either prove him right or prove him wrong, like I was being watched every moment, like I could never just... He exhaled. I was jealous of you. You could operate without being watched. You could make mistakes in the dark. I had to be perfect in the light. He looked up. I looked at you like you were taking things because I thought you were free in ways I wasn't, and I couldn't stand it. Damian stared at his brother. Elena looked at the two of them. Same face, same father, same wound delivered from two different angles. And she thought about Sylvia's voice at the charity event. They are both waiting for the other one to confirm their worst fear. What they'd never managed was to see each other clearly, without the history in the way. The history was in the way right now, but they were looking at each other through it instead of hiding behind it, which was different, which was the only thing that made a difference. He lied to both of us, Damian said. His voice was quiet. That's what I've come to. He divided us on purpose. He needed the division, kept us manageable. If we'd been unified, we would have been stronger than him by the time we were 30. Adrian was still for a long moment. Then he laughed, short, humorless, the laugh of a man who has just seen the architecture of something he'd been living inside. He was afraid of us. Yes, that manipulative old... Adrian stopped, composed himself, set his jaw. He's been dead for 8 years, and he's still running the play. Not anymore, Damian said. They looked at each other across the desk. Something passed between them that Elena couldn't name precisely, but could feel. The specific quality of air in a room when something old and heavy finally begins to move. It was not a resolution. It was not the end of 38 years in one conversation. It was messier and more fragile and more real than that. But it was a beginning, and beginnings have their own weight. Adrian looked at Elena. I owe you an apology, he said. She shook her head. You don't? I do. He held her gaze. Not for what I felt. I'm not apologizing for that, but I used you, without meaning to, as a stand-in for something that had nothing to do with you. I warned you away from Damian because I couldn't separate what was about him from what was about me. He said it plainly, without drama, the way he said things when he'd made up his mind to be honest. You deserved better than that from someone you'd worked beside for 3 years. She looked at him. This man she'd spent 3 years reading, who she'd thought she understood the shape of, and she saw now that what she'd understood was the surface, capable, strategic, controlled, real, but not complete. The complete version was sitting across from her looking like a man who had just set down something very heavy that he'd been carrying for a long time. Adrian, she said, for what it's worth, she stopped, found the honest version. What I felt for you was real. The work, the trust, she found the word carefully. The closeness. That was real. It just wasn't the shape you needed it to be. And that's not a failure. That's just what it was. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his eyes that was sad and settled at the same time. I know, he said. I think I knew what it was. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. I let it be ambiguous longer than I should have, because ambiguous was easier. Yes, she said. I understand that. He nodded, picked up his glass, looked at his brother. Take care of her, he said. Not a warning, not a permission, just what it was. A man saying the truest thing he could about someone he cared about, to the only other person in the room he trusted with it. Damian held his brother's gaze. I intend to. Boss. She resigned the following Monday. She'd written the letter 3 times. The first version was formal and brief and said nothing real. The second version said too much. The third version was a single page and was honest without being unkind, and she left it on Adrian's desk with a coffee she'd made the way he took it, which was the most personal thing she could think to do. He called her at noon. The coffee was a nice touch, he said. I thought so. 2 weeks' notice. 2 weeks. A pause. I'm keeping the contract methodology you built for the Meridian files. I want you to know that. She smiled at the wall of her apartment. I'd be insulted if you didn't. Elena, his voice shifted. You were the best person who ever worked for me. I want you to know I know that. Not because you were indispensable, though you were, but because you were honest with me even when I made it difficult. That's not something most people do. A beat. I won't find another you. You'll find someone good, she said. Give them room to disagree with you. Don't make them guess what you need. A short laugh, taking one last shot on the way out. Habit. Yes, he said. I know. Another pause. Be well, Elena. You too, Adrian. She hung up and sat at her kitchen table and let herself feel the full weight of it. 3 years, the work, the trust, the shape of a professional life that had defined her completely and that she was now stepping outside of by choice. It hurt in the specific way things hurt when they were good and they're over. The clean ache of an ending that was right, even though right things can still cost you something real. She sat with it for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and started updating her resume because she was constitutionally incapable of sitting still in an in-between, and because building the next thing had always been how she moved through loss. Damian did not ask her to move in with him, which she appreciated. He did not suggest she take a role in the Voss operational structure, which she appreciated more. What he did was leave room, deliberate, careful room, for her to figure out what came next on her own terms, while being present enough that figuring it out didn't happen in a vacuum. She noticed this. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, filed it, cross-referenced it against the version of him she'd been afraid of, found that the two versions didn't match. 3 weeks after she resigned, she was at his apartment with takeout containers on the coffee table and a contract she was reviewing for a consultancy position she'd been offered, and he was on the phone in the other room dealing with something operational that he dealt with in the other room because he'd learned, quickly, without being told, that she didn't need to be in every room. She looked up from the contract and listened to the murmur of his voice through the wall and felt something that was not the vertigo of the rearrangement she'd felt in the community center. This was steadier. This was the thing after the rearrangement, when the furniture has been moved and you've stopped reaching for where it used to be. He came back and sat down and picked up his food and looked at the contract in her hands. Good offer. Decent. The scope is interesting. The rate is low. Negotiate it. Obviously. She turned a page. They're a legitimate firm. No Voss adjacency. He looked at her. Is that a requirement? It's a preference. She glanced up. I want to build something that's mine, not an extension of something I was already part of. She held his gaze. You understand that? He did. She saw it. Yes. I'm not... She stopped. I'm not going anywhere. I just need the work to be mine. I know. He said it without injury in it, which was the right way to say it. That's not something I'd take from you. She looked at him for a moment, then back at the contract. The rate is insulting, actually. Send them a counter. I was going to. I know, he said. I just like when you're indignant about money. She threw a napkin at him. He caught it without looking up from his food, which she was not going to admit was impressive. 6 weeks later, she found out she was pregnant. She sat in her bathroom with the test in her hand for a very long time. Longer than was strictly necessary, given that the result was not ambiguous. She sat with it the way she sat with important information, letting it become real, letting the shape of it settle into the room before she tried to respond to it. Then she walked out of the bathroom and into the kitchen where Damian was making coffee because it was 7 a.m, and he was terrible at mornings in a way she'd discovered only recently and found unexpectedly endearing. She set the test on the counter in front of him. He looked at it, looked at her, looked at it again. He said nothing for long enough that she started to say something to fill it, and then he set down his coffee cup very carefully, like a man making sure his hands were free, and he turned to face her completely. His face was doing something she'd never seen on it before. The controlled surface was entirely gone. What was underneath was something undefended and human, and underneath that, something that looked like a man confronting a fear he hadn't known he had until this moment. Say something, she said. He stopped. His voice had come out different, rougher. Give me a second. She waited. He put his hands on the counter, looked at the space between them. She watched him work through something, watched the calculation and the control and the strategic precision that he applied to everything fall completely away, and what was left was just a man in a kitchen at 7 a.m. who had just been handed something that didn't fit inside any framework he'd built. Are you all right? He asked. His voice was still rough. I don't know yet. Are you? No. He said it honestly. No, I'm not all right. He looked up. I don't know how to do this. Nobody does. That's not, he exhaled. Elena, I grew up in a family where he started again. The men in my family do not know how to love things without using them. My father didn't. His father didn't. I've spent my entire adult life trying to build things that are real and protected, and I still... His voice broke very slightly on the last word. Not dramatically, just enough to be real. I don't know if I know how to be a father without repeating what was done to me. She looked at him standing at his kitchen counter at 7 in the morning, the most feared name in the city's operational hierarchy, coming apart at the idea of a child. She crossed the kitchen. She stood in front of him and put her hand on his jaw and tilted his face up until he was looking at her directly. You built a community center, she said, and you hid it because you didn't want anyone to use it against you. And you showed it to me before you showed it to anyone because you wanted one person to know what you actually were. She held his gaze. You already know how to protect something you love. You've been doing it your whole life. You just never had someone you could do it openly for. His jaw moved under her hand. His eyes were doing something she'd only seen them do once before. In the car, on the phone with Adrian, when something had gotten through the surface. You're not afraid? He asked. I'm terrified, she said, but I'm not afraid of you. There's a difference. He put his hand over hers on his jaw, held it there. They stood in the kitchen while the coffee finished brewing, and neither of them said anything else, because some things are complete without a closing sentence. She called her mother that afternoon. She'd been putting it off without meaning to, the call existing in her head as something she'd do when she had the right words, which was how she'd put off most things that mattered. Her mother answered on the second ring the way she always did, which was one of the consistent things Elena had built her sense of safety on for 30 years. There's something I need to tell you, Elena said. I know, her mother said. You can't possibly know. You sound like you did when you were 17 and you'd done something you weren't sure I'd approve of, but you'd already decided to do regardless. A pause. So whatever it is, just say it. She said it, all of it. Damian, the resignation, the pregnancy, the parts she'd been figuring out as she went. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was the gift she'd always given and which Elena only fully understood as a gift now that she was old enough to know how rare it was. When she finished, her mother said, Is he good to you? Yes. Are you sure? I'm sure. A long pause. Then what do you need from me? Elena sat at her kitchen table and felt something behind her eyes that she didn't often allow. I don't know yet, she said. I think I just needed to say it out loud. You've always been like that, her mother said. You have to say things out loud before they become real. You did it with homework. You did it with jobs. You did it with... She stopped. Say it as many times as you need to. I'll be here. Elena sat with the phone pressed to her ear and let herself feel the full weight of the year. The accidental kiss, the unraveling, the community center, the crisis, Adrian's face in the car, the kitchen at 7 in the morning, all of it pressing down into the single moment of sitting at a table and being told, I'll be here. Thank you, she said. Come visit, her mother said. Bring him. I want to get a look at this man. Elena laughed. The real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere below calculation. I will. 3 months later, Mafia Boss organized a family dinner. Not a negotiation, not a gathering with an agenda underneath an agenda. A dinner, the old-fashioned kind, where the stated purpose was actually the purpose. Elena understood this was not an accident. Mafia Boss did not do accidents, but she also understood it was not strategy in the way the Voss men use strategy. It was something different, the kind of decision that women who have watched men destroy each other with pride for 40 years make when they're done watching. She arrived with Damian, which was different from the last time she'd arrived at this house. The last time she'd arrived as an employee, careful and professional, with a folder of background notes in her bag. This time she had nothing in her bag except her phone and her keys and the knowledge that she was not here in any capacity except her own. Sylvia met her in the entryway the same way she had before, took her hand, held it a beat longer than necessary. You look well, Sylvia said. I feel it, Elena said. Mostly. Sylvia's eyes moved to Elena's midsection. Just briefly, just long enough for Elena to understand that Sylvia knew, and had probably known before Damian told her, because Sylvia Voss had been reading this family for 40 years. "Good," she said. Just that. They went inside. Adrian was already there. He was standing near the fireplace with a glass in his hand, and he looked up when they walked in. His eyes went to Elena first, then to Damian beside her, and then to where Damian's hand was at the small of Elena's back. Not possessive, just present. He looked like a man who had made a certain peace with something and was still in the process of figuring out what that peace actually felt like in practice. He crossed the room. He extended his hand to Damian first. Damian took it. They held the handshake 1 beat longer than a professional handshake, 2 beats shorter than an embrace, and in that in-between space, Elena saw 38 years of something that was not resolved but was acknowledged, which was different, which was where everything real begins. Then Adrian looked at Elena. "You look good," he said. "You look tired," she said. He laughed. It sounded like him. The real version, the one she'd heard on rare occasions in 3 years, usually after a crisis was over and the performance wasn't needed anymore. "I've been interviewing candidates for your position. How's that going?" "Terrible." He took a sip of his drink. "The third one called me Adrian without being invited to. The fourth one was afraid of me. The fifth one wasn't afraid of me enough." He raised his glass slightly. "I may never recover." "You'll find someone," she said. "Stop looking for me and start looking for whoever they actually are." He looked at her for a moment. "That's the last piece of advice you'll give me as a former employee. Consider it a parting gift." He nodded, looked at the room, his mother arranging something at the far end, his brother standing a few feet away talking to one of the cousins. The ordinary density of a family that had spent a long time fracturing finally in the same room for a reason that wasn't business. "I'm going to be all right," he said. To her. Quietly, not asking for confirmation, just saying it out loud. "I know," she said. "You're going to be more than that." He held her gaze 1 more second, then he nodded, once, clean, final, and excused himself toward the opposite end of the room. Damian appeared beside her. He'd watched that from across the room, and he'd let it happen, and he didn't ask about it, which she was grateful for. "Okay?" he asked. "Yes?" He looked at her sideways. "You're going to miss working for him." "I'm going to miss the work," she said. "That's different." "Is it?" "The work was mine." He just provided the context. She looked at the room. The grandmother in the corner, who apparently never missed these things. The cousins. Sylvia moving between people with the quiet authority of a woman who has been the actual foundation of something for 40 years without the title. "I'll make new context." "You already are." She looked at him. He was watching the room the same way she was, and there was something in the angle of his face, the way the light caught it, the way he was still without being closed off. The way he looked like a man who was somewhere he'd chosen to be rather than somewhere he'd been assigned, that she had not seen in the versions of him she'd compiled over weeks of careful observation. He looked like himself, whoever that was, under all of it. She thought about the single line in her notebook. He builds real things and hides them. She was going to need a new line. "Come sit down," he said. "My grandmother is going to want to interrogate you before dinner, and you should have a drink first." "Is she going to be difficult?" "She's 91. She's been difficult since the Carter administration." He looked at her. "You'll be fine. You're better at difficult than anyone I've ever met." "That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "I'm working on romantic," he said. "Give me time." She took the drink he handed her. She walked with him toward the dining room where his 91-year-old grandmother was already watching them approach with the bright, assessing eyes of someone who had outlasted every attempt to handle her with care. Elena met those eyes directly and did not look away. The old woman smiled, slow, approving. "Sit here," she said, patting the chair beside her. "I want to know everything about you." And Elena sat down and began to talk, and the room filled with the noise of a family, imperfect, historical, damaged in specific ways that had names now and could therefore, slowly, be addressed. gathering around a table that had room enough for all of it, for what was broken, for what had been hidden, for what had been chosen freely, finally, with both eyes open. Damian sat across from her. He caught her eye across the table and held it for 1 second, unhurried, steady, with that almost smile that she'd spent weeks trying to classify and had finally stopped trying to classify because some things resisted that, and that resistance was part of what made them real. She looked back at him. She did not look away.